sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, the European Union's refusal to purchase Russian gas until 2027, new restrictions on the banking sector of the Russian Federation, its shadow fleet, and for the first time, crypto platforms. All of this has dealt significant blows to the Russian economy, and on top of that, both Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have made it clear that Washington and Beijing are no longer enemies, but are ready to seek compromises. How is the Kremlin losing its levers of influence against the backdrop of all these events? Let's break it down. In the 9+ months since Trump's inauguration, U.S.-China relations have gone through a whole series of dramatic twists and turns. Recently, a real trade war broke out between the countries, which of course played into Putin's hands. And now, for the first time since 2019, Donald Trump met with Xi Jinping in Busan, South Korea. Trump rated this meeting 12 out of 10 possible points. Xi noted that the two largest economies in the world can achieve prosperity together. Beijing agreed to suspend export controls on rare earth elements, resume purchases of American soybeans, and step up efforts to combat the trafficking of banned substances. In return, the U.S. agreed to lower tariffs on Chinese goods by 10 percentage points. Russia's war against Ukraine became one of the key topics of the negotiations. President Trump emphasized that he is counting on close cooperation with Beijing to achieve lasting peace.
Trump stated directly, "We will work together to end Russia's war against Ukraine." And she called Trump's agenda to make America great again resonant with the idea of China's own revival. They are not enemies, they are partners. And for Moscow, this is a disaster. While Putin is launching missiles, real agreements about the future world order are being made without him. Now China has an incentive to trade with America rather than support the Kremlin's toxic war. If Beijing and Washington find a new formula for cooperation, Russia will simply remain outside the civilized world, forever playing the role of a raw materials appendage, but only situationally. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
After the U.S. Treasury imposed sanctions on Russia's largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, the U.S. administration was, of course, interested in whether Beijing was ready to reduce the volume of Russian oil imports. After all, these two companies alone accounted for about a quarter of Russia's oil exports to China last year. On his way to Washington aboard his plane, the head of the White House told reporters that this issue was not raised during his meeting with Xi, and later wrote on social media that China had agreed to start purchasing American energy resources, which would be yet another painful blow to Putin's war machine.
China has also agreed to begin the process of purchasing American energy. In fact, a major deal may take place for the purchase of oil and gas from the great state of Alaska. Chris Wright, Doug Burgum, and our energy teams will meet to discuss the possibility of such an agreement. The agreements reached today will bring prosperity and security to millions of Americans. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on Truth Social.
Major Chinese state-owned oil companies have already suspended purchases of Russian oil delivered by sea. According to Bloomberg, this has led to a drop in prices for key fuel grades and a decrease in trading volumes. Analysts note that Chinese companies prefer to act cautiously to avoid falling under secondary sanctions. And as a result, Moscow is losing both markets and revenue.
The price of a key grade of Russian oil plummeted after Western sanctions forced Chinese refineries to cancel some of their purchases. According to traders active in the market who wish to remain anonymous, last week before the latest round of sanctions was imposed, spot sales of ESPO crude oil, shipped from Russia's Far East, were being offered at a 50-cent discount per barrel to the benchmark Brent price on the ICE exchange. Last week, before the latest round of sanctions was imposed, the premium for a barrel of this grade was more than $1, according to a Bloomberg report.
President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that he is already receiving the first detailed assessments of the impact of the new sanctions on Russia's war economy. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Moscow's losses from the restrictions could reach $50 billion annually. The head of state noted that, based on this data, Ukraine will adjust its communication with partners when preparing the next sanctions packages.
Oil exports are the foundation of Russia's audacity. If the sanctions remain in place and are strengthened, Russia will lose at least $50 billion next year, maybe even more. And that's a strong argument for Russia to have a reason to end this war. We will create more arguments like this. Ukraine is already in contact with the European Union regarding the 20th package of sanctions. We are submitting our proposals and are also in contact with the American side. We expect that key countries will support exactly this course of action. We can already see that there will be a reduction in imports of Russian oil by India and China. And it is necessary to ensure that sanctions are not circumvented through third countries. A reduction in Russian oil means a reduction in Russia's war.
In Moscow, they closely watched the meeting between the leaders of the United States and China, realizing that the geopolitical landscape is changing rapidly. A rapprochement between Washington and Beijing will weaken the Kremlin's already limited influence in Eurasia. Moscow will simply end up on the sidelines of global politics. By the way, after the U.S. sanctions, not a single Indian oil refinery has placed new orders for Russian oil. Reuters reports that even previously ordered shipments from traders have been canceled. The Russian market reacted to this news instantly. 18 out of 24 sectors of the manufacturing industry have started sliding into recession. By the way, these sectors account for almost 80% of all goods produced in the country.
The tightening of Western sanctions, which in October targeted Rosneft and Lukoil, companies that extract and export half of all Russian oil, could very well push the economy into the red. Entrepreneurs are expecting a deterioration of overall conditions, economic stagnation, a decline in consumer demand, and higher taxes. To fill the military budget starting in 2026, the government is once again raising VAT to 22% and is also preparing a radical tax reform for small businesses, which will strip 700,000 entrepreneurs of the simplified taxation system. From a publication by the Moscow Times.
The only way to force the aggressor country to stop the war and address its internal problems is through systematic pressure, economic sanctions, and diplomatic isolation. Ukraine's partners must act as a united front, strengthening restrictions and closing all loopholes so that the Kremlin is left with no resources to continue its war against Ukraine. Putin can dress up in camouflage, threaten with Orshins and Yars missiles, but in the end, he'll have to sit down at the negotiating table and talk about real peace.
I understand that modern Russia will never be in an adequate state. It's just impossible, right? With the kind of elite that Putin has gathered around him, you can't get an effective, competitive country and so on. That's just objective, right? But basically, the main goal is to force them through fear to back off somewhere, hide, and deal with their own internal problems, which are going to come crashing down on their heads and so on.
The meeting between Trump and Xi has essentially restarted global processes, leaving Russia out of the key negotiations. China is cutting back on purchases of Russian oil, and India is already openly boycotting them. Global players are now negotiating about the future without Russia's involvement. And this could turn out to be one of the most painful blows for the Kremlin.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.